Our faith journey is all about recognizing and celebrating what God has already done for us and recognizing how much more and being open to how much more God has in store for us. We are always being called to more with God. From the very beginning, we heard earlier in Lent the story of our first parents. We heard, we know the story of creation, original sin. Through everything that happens to the human race, and as Israel becomes a nation, a special possession of God, God is always calling His people to more. We hear of the infinite, abiding, never-ending love of God in the story of creation. And even through the fall, and in all the ways that the Israelites are constantly rebelling against God, God never takes back His faithfulness or His love. He continues to be faithful and is ever calling His people to more. Through the times of the prophets, and we hear so much of the prophets in our liturgy throughout the course of the year, God speaking through the prophets is always calling Israel to more. The prophet Ezekiel lived in a very challenging time. It was a time of the Babylonian captivity and the time just before, as Israel had strayed so far from God's way, so far from the covenant, repeatedly turning their backs, that Jerusalem is destroyed, the temple is destroyed, many are killed, many more are carried into captivity. It is a time of desolation for the nation of Israel that felt dead, abandoned and dead. And so much of Ezekiel is warning the people to change their ways, and when they don't, all of this befalls them and they feel dead. And then God begins to speak through the prophet a message of hope and a message of resurrection. And we hear part of that in our first reading today. It's part of a longer prophecy, part of a longer image that Ezekiel portrays. The land, the desert land, strewn with the dry, dead bones, representing Israel, seemingly dead. But then as Ezekiel prophesies over the dry bones, maybe we're familiar with this image from Ezekiel, as Ezekiel prophesies over the dry bones, the bones begin to rattle and shake and come together. And from that seeming death comes life, as there is the bones coming together and flesh and sinew and muscle and everything else, creating life. We hear those wonderful words today. "O my people, I will open your graves and have you rise from them and bring you back." Where there is seeming death, God brings life. And He will guide the people of Israel home. Not back to the reality that they knew before, but calling them to more, calling them to faithfulness, calling them to a new way of life in the Lord, calling them to more than they had known before. As Christians, when we hear those kinds of prophecies in the Old Testament, we see that coming to fulfillment in the mission, the ministry, and the life of Jesus. Paul today speaks of it in terms of life in the flesh versus life in the spirit. And we think of life in the flesh, it's not just about sins of the flesh, but life in the flesh is about life only for the here and now, not being able to see anything else, but just living for the day. Life in the flesh is life that is rooted simply in our earthly existence. But we who know Christ are called to life in the Spirit, life beyond ourselves. We are being called to more. The generous, eternal love of God. As we come to faith, as we live our faith, as we grow in our faith, we are growing in that life in the Spirit. We hear that call throughout the season of Lent, that we are called to more, to turn aside from, turn away from, reject those fleshly things that hold us back from the things of God. All of the selfishness, all of the pride, all of the arrogance, all of the sins that we struggle with. By the grace of God, we are called to leave those things behind, to go forward in life in the Spirit. Because that's what God desires of us. That's what God is offering us. Jesus, in his ministry, is constantly calling his disciples to more. Not just greater understanding, not just a greater desire. You know, we heard in the gospel 2 weeks ago, we heard the story of the Samaritan woman. Jesus is calling her to experience the living water, calling her to thirst for more. Last week, the story of the man born blind gains his sight, reminding us of the need for us to perfect our eyes of faith, to see more clearly by the grace of God, calling us to greater faith. In the story of Lazarus that we hear today, that's the beautiful thing about our parish patron, John the Evangelist, gives us these beautiful images, this beautiful story in all of its intricacies. The story of Lazarus, there's a lot of stuff going on there, but it's drawing us in so that we can place ourselves in the story. That's what John wants us to do. Not looking at it as an outside observer, but being drawn into the story. Not drawn just to greater awareness, not just to greater understanding, not just to greater faith, but as we hear today, the Lord is drawing us deeper into his life, to know his life more fully. We can put ourselves in the place of these different people in the story. We can put ourselves in the place of the disciples. When Jesus says we're going to go back to Judea, and the disciples say they just wanted to stone you, why do you want to go back there? Jesus says, this is the work I've been given to do. And so we have Thomas, maybe a little bit sarcastically, saying, let us go back to die with him. For the disciples, recognizing that they are being drawn more deeply into their lives as apostles, to minister and, yes, even to suffer martyrdom. For Martha and Mary, all of us can relate to that. We have all experienced grief and mourning when we lose somebody we love. And my mom died a couple months ago. My first reaction is like any other reaction. We lose somebody that we love. We're kind of like Martha. Sometimes we charge after Jesus. Lord, why did you let this happen? If you had been here, something else could have happened. Lord, why? Mary, too, is grieving, but in a different way. We all experience that. But Jesus is not wagging his finger. Come on, Martha, you know better than that. The Lord greets her where she is and calls her into life. Martha says, yes, Lord, I know he's going to rise one day. Jesus says, that's now. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and life. You don't have to go somewhere else. You don't have to wait. Here I am. Do you believe this? And Martha and Mary, even in their grief, are drawn deeper into life. Doesn't mean they don't still feel sadness. Doesn't mean their faith is perfect. Doesn't mean that the faith of the disciples is perfect. But as we live a life of faith, as we hear and respond to the call of Christ, we are being drawn deeper, not just into understanding, but into his life. And then there's Lazarus. Lazarus, in John's story here, represents every Christian. The name Lazarus is translated as one who was helped by God. Lazarus is called forth, literally called forth from death to life. Lazarus, come out. The Lord is calling him forth from the tomb, calling him forth into life, because he is the resurrection and the life. For John, the apostle, he wants us to understand that the resurrection is not just about something in the future, but it's something that we are experiencing now. It's something that we experience at the moment of our baptism. At that moment of baptism, we hear the Lord calling us for the first time. Come forth. In the waters of baptism, we enter into the resurrected life of the Lord, and from that point forward, the journey of faith is about recognizing the call of Christ and growing in that life. Through prayer, through life in the church, through the sacraments, in so many ways, walking forth into the light, walking forth into the life. Just as Jesus calls Lazarus, he's calling each one of us by name. Come out of your tombs, come out of your burial cloths. Put aside the things, the sins that bind you. Come out of the tombs of despair. Come out the tombs of hopelessness. Come out of the tombs of death. Come walk in my light and my life. As we answer the call of Lent and all that we're doing during Lent, the sacrifices and the giving up and the penance and everything else, it is about putting aside the fleshly part of our existence, things that need to be put aside, that we can live that life in the Spirit, growing in that resurrected life. The fullness of the resurrection still awaits us. But that's where we're moving. That's what we're called to. God has given us so much, and He is calling us to so much more. And so as we continue the Lenten journey, as we enter into the final days of our Lenten journey, as Easter draws near, we look forward to celebrating that great festival of life, that great festival of resurrection in just 2 weeks' time, that reminds us of the eternal Easter to come, where those who have gone before us have already passed. As we continue the journey, as we approach this Easter, as we continue making our way toward the Easter of eternal life, may we never fail to recognize and celebrate how much God has already done for us. And keep our ears of faith, our eyes of faith attuned as the Lord continues to call us to ever greater things, to celebrate and live His life and His resurrection more fully.